Welcome to the Intentional Athlete Podcast, where strength is more than a number on the bar. I'm your host, Ross Leppala, powerlifter, coach, and co-creator of the Intentional Athlete Experience. This show is for lifters, movers, and seekers who know that what happens in the gym echoes into your life. We explore how to train with purpose, live with clarity, and channel the pursuit of strength into something deeper, something transformative. Each episode, we'll dive into conversation, tools, and insights that help you align your mindset, body, and spirit. Because real growth doesn't just happen under the barbell. It happens in your mind, in your breath, and in your choices. This is about more than just PRs. This is about presence, power, and progress that lasts. Welcome to the journey, my friend. Welcome to the Intentional Athlete Podcast. Hey, what's up, my friends? Welcome back to the Intentional Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Ross Leppala. Excited to bring on my friend Paul Oneid today. I met Paul online, like a lot of us meet, several years ago now. He's been on the podcast before when it was Project Unchained. Had a lot of really cool conversation. Paul's been on the journey of personal development and lifting and pursuit of physical strength for many years now, and has done so at a very high level. A while ago, I forget exactly how long ago, a little over a year, he suffered a pretty significant injury. And one of the things that really stood out to me and resonated with me was Paul was super transparent about the entire recovery process on his social media in a really profoundly positive and helpful way to navigate forward during a tumultuous time. Today, we get to navigate some of that conversation with Paul and get a little bit more details on some of those things, because at the end of the day, we have to learn to navigate hardship. And when we can navigate hardship with skill, we come out the other side of that hardship a much more capable and profound and enjoyable human being. And I really appreciate Paul's perspectives on a lot of different things. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with him. Let's dive in. Paul Oneid, y'all. How you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited to dive in here. I've always had great conversation with you. Finally got to meet you a couple of months ago after being friends online. That's fantastic.
It's always great. I have these moments in my life where I'm just sitting there just being grateful for random things. We have friends on the internet who we talk to multiple times a week, but we never met in person. And then we meet them in person. We're like, oh my God, the internet is so cool.
Yeah.
I was on a call with a client the other day. My client's in Kuwait. And I'm sitting here looking at a gentleman who could not be further away from me geographically, but I'm sitting face to face with him. And I just had this thought, I'm like, this is so cool.
Yeah, definitely. It removes that distance factor and brings us together in a different way. And it can really add a lot of value and quality if we use it in such a way and not use it to doom scroll on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's obviously a few things that we want to get into today. You've been on the show before. Most people that are going to listen probably know who you are, but I do want to set the stage a little bit and who is Paul a little bit, and especially your ground and your powerlifting pedigree, what you accomplished in your heyday and how that sets the stage up for our injury conversation.
Back in my day, so my name is Paul Oneid. I am a strength and conditioning coach. I'm the owner of Master Athletic Performance with my wife, Olivia. I'm also the lead educator at Coaches Corner University, where we do continuing education for other coaches and mentorship. I guess my powerlifting pedigree, you would say, I started powerlifting as a means to relate to the athletes I was coaching. So at the time, I was an intern strength and conditioning coach at the University of South Florida while completing my master's degree in exercise science. And I went into my boss's office and just said, hey, listen, man, these guys are not listening to me. They don't respect me. What am I doing wrong? And he straight up said, he's like, you're a white kid from Canada who never played football. Why would they listen to you?
The hard truth.
The hard truth. And he's like, you need to compete in something and you need to make sure they know you're competing in it. I was like, okay, done. I'm pretty strong. I'm going to compete in powerlifting. I was already training powerlifting-esque. I was into that Joe DeFranco, West Side kind of, model of training concurrently. So I just shifted my focus a little bit towards powerlifting. I registered for a meet, and lo and behold, they saw me lifting heavy weights. They saw me pushing myself the same way I was asking them to push themselves, and the respect level rose, and I was able to relate to them a lot better. I ended up doing my first competition when I was 21 years old. So that was back in 2010. Since then, I've competed, I think, over 30 times. At one point in 2015, 2016, I was ranked in the top 10 all time in both the 220 and 242 weight classes. I've squatted over 800 14 times. My best total is 1960 at 242. Best Wilks, yeah, I'm using Wilks, not, whatever the coefficient is right now.
Wilkes, that 45 years ago powerlifting number.
Yeah, my best Wilks, I believe, was 532. I totaled 1930 at 220 with an 800-pound squat, a 430 bench, and a 725 deadlift. And at the time, that 800 squat was fifth all time, actually, which was pretty cool.
When did you hit those numbers? I was just curious for my own time stamping, I guess, for lack of a better word.
That 532 Wilks was in 2015.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Between 2015 and 2022-ish, 2021, I competed a number of times. I hit some small PRs here and there. I floated back between sleeves and wraps, and never really put it all together on the same day. Had a string of injuries, ended up having some pretty serious hip and knee pain on my left side that ultimately pushed me out of competing. It was to the point where my total squat volume for the week was 1 rep.
Oof, yeah.
And I couldn't tolerate more than 1 rep. So at that point, training just wasn't fun, and I needed another way to push myself. So I decided, hey, I'm going to compete in a bodybuilding show. It took a year to prepare for that. I did my first bodybuilding show in 2022. It was a terrible experience. It had a whole bunch of gastrointestinal issues leading into the show. But I did it. I stepped on stage, and I completed the mission. At that point, I was healthy enough in terms of orthopedically that I could kind of start to transition back into powerlifting.
Yeah.
I worked with a great friend of mine, doctor of physical therapy, women's physique Olympian, and elite level powerlifter Danny LaMartina. So together, her and I got me to a point where I was bigger than I ever was. I was stronger than I ever was. I'm like, okay, it's time to compete. I went to go do a tune-up meet. So my plan was just to take some really conservative squat attempts, really conservative bench attempts, put in conservative deadlift attempt, maybe send it on the deadlift because the deadlift is feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
Ended up, first 2 attempts on the squat were kind of shaky, took a conservative attempt to 750 on the third, ended up losing my balance. The bar whip kind of caught me in the bottom, and my weight all shifted back onto my heels. I lost my balance and I almost fell. And when I almost fell and tried to recover, both my quad tendons snapped. I ended up having a bilateral patellar fracture and bilateral quad rupture. So essentially the tops of my kneecaps fractured off and took my quad with it.
Fuck.
Yeah, spent 9 days in the hospital, 5.5 weeks in a wheelchair, and then went through the recovery process. And luckily for me, my background is in injury rehab, coming from a collegiate strength and conditioning background. I had some amazing people in my corner with, Danny and my friend Dylan Seeley and Dr. Mike T. Nelson, Matt Nichols. I had some amazing people in my corner helping me out, giving me some advice. And I ended up rehabbing to a point where I guess now it's 13 months post-surgery. I competed in a bodybuilding show with my best physique ever. I ended up winning the Masters 35 plus class, coming second in the open division to the person who ended up winning the overall at the show. And it was just a great experience for me to put that chapter behind me.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we'll dive into that year of rehab and stuff like that. But that's pretty much the story.
Yeah, man. So obviously no slouch to moving big heavy weight in your heyday with powerlifting, and no slouch to having to fight some battles to get back to where you were. But then you really got tested when you finally got back to doing a reorientation meet, so to speak, and life really dealt you a shitty hand.
Yep. It would. The funny part is I knew powerlifting was done for me after the meet. So the plan was to do the tune-up, and then in December, the the all-time squat record for Canada in the 242 weight class is 824. It was set by Jeremy Hamilton, who's a dear friend of mine, and I wanted to break Jeremy's record. I said, if anyone's going to break it, it's going to be me. That's only 7 kilos better than my best. I can do it.
Yeah.
So my plan was to do the tune-up and then in December break Jeremy's record and walk away from powerlifting. So when I got hurt, it was just an expedited exit, so to speak. I was done. Mentally, I was like, okay, cool, we're done. I remember actually, I think you'll appreciate this, when I felt the snaps to the moment my chest hit the floor, felt like I went through like probably 20 minutes of contemplation. And there was just this deep feeling of acceptance of my situation. It was like, okay, I'm fucked up. This is going to suck. I'm okay with it. What's next? And then obviously it was chaos around me. And what really got the emotions going was they brought me to the back room and I was finally able to make eye contact with my wife. And at that point I realized, like, yeah, I was the hurt one, but the burden was on her.
Mm.
And that really, really hit me hard.
Yeah.
Still get a little emotional thinking about that because of how much she did over those 6 weeks in a wheelchair. And yeah, I couldn't have done it without her. She was absolutely incredible. Yeah, so that was it. I was like, I think this is a great discussion because I think a lot of people when they get injured, there's a challenge to their identity. Can I keep doing the things that I'm doing? Is this going to affect who I am as a person? But at that point, I was 36 years old, man. Like, I wasn't Paul Oneid, the powerlifter. Like, if you would have asked me maybe 33 years old, 32 years old, even though I was doing a bodybuilding show, I was, Paul, who are you? I'm a powerlifter. Powerlifting was probably like 5th, 6th, maybe even 7th on the list of things that comprised who I am. You know, husband, mentor, coach, educator, like all of these things came first, and I resonated with those identities or pieces of my identity a lot more deeply than I did as an athlete. It was just something that I did. So these are all things that went through my mind during those 6 weeks of like, okay, well, who am I really? And where I came to or landed on was, I am someone who does hard things, and this is an opportunity to do something really, really hard and galvanize my identity and show people who I am and show myself who I am. I am who I say I am. And that was ultimately the driver for the quick recovery.
Yeah, man. I know I definitely really appreciated that message. I recall like you were pretty transparent on social media about viewing this not as a setback, but as an opportunity. And like seeing that shift is really awesome because a lot of times, a lot of people that go through a situation like that, it takes them a hot minute to get to the point where they can see opportunity. Prior to that, there's generally a lot of resistance to the acceptance of the situation, and in the resistance to the acceptance, that is when we become a victim of our circumstance. And really the only thing that needs to happen is just the mindset shift. We just have to view it differently. And I get that sometimes that can be difficult, but like that was critical for you in that moment, was to shift your perspective to seeing the opportunity of what can I do with this? What possibilities exist with this situation?
Yeah. And I like the way that you use the word resistance, because I think we find a lot of opportunity to evaluate things when dealing with hyperbole. So if you take things to the extremist of the extreme, does this hold up? So I was living the extreme of the extreme. Like I was literally crippled. So what can I do in this instance? And I think a lot of stress for people in general is centered around resistance.
Oh, yeah.
Something happens, they don't like it, and they fight against it. But there is nothing in my power that could have changed the fact that my quads were not attached to my knees. Nothing.
Yeah.
I had the surgery, now they're attached. Nothing could change the fact that they lacked function in that moment. So then, rather than resisting, getting depressed, my default operating mechanism is action, because action is the antidote to anxiety. Anxiety being fear of the future.
Yeah.
If I wanted to have the future that I envisioned, I had to take action. And that action meant that 8 hours of my day, every single day, was centered around something rehabilitation focused. Whether it's blood flow restriction, muscle stim, whether it's corrective exercise, isometrics, mobility work, passive modalities I had a PEMF machine that I was sitting in for 4 hours a day. So these are things that were within my control. And so if I accepted my circumstances, accepted the fact that these are the things that I could actually do, I would be taking meaningful steps forward. And if I'm taking meaningful steps forward, I'm working to change my circumstance. Being a victim of circumstance centers wholly around your resistance to the circumstance. You can't change it.
Right.
Right? I see this a lot with clients who go through personal issues. Let's take it to the extreme of the extreme. Your wife cheats on you. That sucks.
Yep.
I don't have a time machine. I can't change that. But you have to do an evaluation. God forbid this is ever the situation, but you have children. You have a home. You have a career. You have joint expenses. You have all of these things. You also have a life that you've built with this person.
Yep.
Now, you can't change the personal situation. How do you take action to resolve it or to come to a conclusion? Whether that's dissolving the marriage, making the marriage work, there's all types of different outcomes that you can aim for. But you have to pick one. And then you have to reverse engineer back and then do the thing.
Yep.
So why not just start by doing the thing rather than lamenting about it?
100%. 100%. Have you ever read Life is Magic by John Dorenbos?
I have not.
It's a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. He was a long snapper in the NFL for 15 years with the Eagles and 1 year with the Saints somewhere, something like that. But he also did magic tricks with cards, and he was on America's Got Talent to do his magic tricks. And it was really neat. His story, he uses magic as motivational, inspirational topics because his life circumstances as a kid was, I'm going to spare you the details and just fully admit outright that the first 4 chapters that I read on a plane to Columbus, Ohio for the Arnold 1 year, I was crying through the first 4 chapters of reading it because it's
really,
dude, it's tough. It's tough to read and imagine and put yourself in that, what kind of life situation that was. Very tough. So it's a very moving story, but what's especially important about it is his quote that I absolutely love. You can either live a life of vision or a life of circumstance. And everything that you just said nails that to a T. You can make the choice to see what you want to create and contribute towards, and you can take action that brings you closer to that. You can let the circumstances define you, and you will be stuck in a state of victimhood.
I love that.
Yes.
I absolutely love that.
I love it as well.
that encompasses my general philosophy on a lot of things related to stress management. I mean, I firmly believe that we're the architects of our own lives. We create life. All of our perceptions shape our reality. Nothing is good or bad. You make it so.
Absolutely.
That's a quote that I try to live by in any situation, whether it's, one of our dogs is 11 years old and he keeps pissing on the carpet. He's 11 years old. There's nothing I can do to change this dog's peeing on the carpet. What I can do is I can make sure that he gets walks every day, and I'm not going to get mad at him. I love that dog. That dog's been with me for 11 years. Do you know how much life has happened to me in 11 years?
Yeah, man.
So why would I perceive that negatively? It just doesn't work for me. It just doesn't work for me. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about, what happened, how I took action. And I mean, that's really what I try to espouse to my clients whenever they're going through hardships. And I think the fact that I was transparent through that whole process really helped my clients see what I'm expecting of them in terms of their own journeys. And I can tell you right now, the results from my clients since seeing me go through that and since me sharing what I'm sharing now and the way that I've pivoted my messaging online and with our communications, it's been a game changer.
I believe that. I would imagine as well that, like, during that process and being transparent, there's probably were lots of times throughout that there was the temptation to go down the other road, the temptation to take that circumstance, oh, poor me, and
No,
being transparent helped keep you on track.
I would love to agree with you, but no.
Cool.
And the reason I don't agree with you is because my wife was doing everything in her power to take care of me. And there is no way that I would do her the disservice of not making every moment count that I could to take that burden off of her.
Mm-hmm.
Being a burden on other people is perhaps my biggest insecurity. And I think that's an insecurity that a lot of men share. We want to be the strong provider. We want to be the person that people can count on. And when the roles are reversed, that was really, really, really hard for me. And again, we can learn a lot from hyperbole. My wife had to wipe my ass. My wife had to empty, I couldn't get into the bathroom. So I had a commode we turned my office into a hospital room. I had to shit in a chair beside my bed. I had to pee in a jug for 6 weeks. And my wife had to take those out to the trash or empty them into the toilet every day for 6 weeks. There was no way I was going to disrespect her in a way that would make her efforts a waste. No chance. So the thought of slacking on my rehab or not doing the blood flow restriction or, the most painful thing was the corrective exercise, because a lot of it was focused around my hip, and being supine for 6 weeks, there was a ton of hip pain that I was dealing with, especially on that left side that I previously had hip pain when I was powerlifting. Mm-hmm. And so, tons of lower back issues, sciatica, but I had to do that rehab work because if I didn't, it would be doing her a disservice.
Yeah.
So you could argue that I offloaded my autonomy or my agency to the pressure I was feeling from her. But in that instance, as long as it led to meaningful action, I don't think it matters. This is one of those things where it's like, you should be intrinsically motivated. It's like, maybe, but as long as you're doing the thing, who really cares? How do you feel about that?
Well, I tend to look at, there is no necessarily bad motivation, extrinsic or intrinsic. Yeah. There just is. And I think we need to rely on what's there, use what's there as the fuel and the energy to be able to take that step forward. What I would say is that I don't believe that it's necessarily healthy or beneficial to ever fully and solely only rely on one form of that. If it's all extrinsic, it's not going to be beneficial. If it's all intrinsic, it's also not going to be beneficial. Because in that moment, it is very beneficial, I think, as an extrinsic motivational factor, not want to be a burden or to be less of a burden as quickly as possible. That's totally real, and I don't view that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I think ultimately what matters is, are you moving towards the goal?
Yeah.
And so if you're moving towards the goal and you're not doing any sort of long-term or let's call it, long-term damage in the process, I see this a lot because I work with a lot of untested athletes. So what they'll say is that they're intrinsically motivated to achieve a goal. They want to do it as expeditiously as possible. So they're willing to make a trade-off in the long term in terms of their health for this short-term goal. And because that goal is, even if that goal is important to them and it's not necessarily for an extrinsic reward, there are equally nefarious outcomes to both. So this is where having a guide, like a coach, to help kind of channel things and help them understand the trade-offs is really important. Because even in my situation, so the reason I was in a wheelchair was because of the fractures. So a lot of people that have quad tendon ruptures, if you rupture the tendon, they suture the tendon back together, and then you can weight bear relatively quickly. But when you have fractures, that bone has to heal, and there's nothing that really can speed up the bone healing.
Right.
And if the bone doesn't heal around that anchor, you're going to re-rupture your quad. So I had the strength, I had the stability, I had the pain, like it wasn't in any pain at that point. I could stand. But the trade-off to standing is the risk of re-injury. So I understood the risks and I made the appropriate trade-off to be patient.
Yeah.
If I was more focused on removing the stressor, I may have been tempted to be more expeditious in my standing and walking and weight bearing. And so understanding trade-offs, understanding motivations. It's like, yeah, I was super motivated to walk so that my wife didn't have to take care of me and empty my poop bags. But I would much rather her empty my poop bags for 6 weeks than to have to empty them for 12, 18, 20 weeks if I re-injured myself.
Right. Yeah. Being situationally aware of all of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. When you're going through that process, like using that motivation to keep you moving forward, what do you think about somebody that may not necessarily have that same situation? Like if they're alone or they don't have a wife and a spouse and a partner to lean on every day, like what does that look like? What do you think that would look like for somebody, or how can they pull at that and pull from your story to fuel that if they should ever find themselves in that situation?
I think the biggest factor is going to be how you internalize that same, I'm going to use the word pressure, but I don't necessarily think that's the appropriate word. That pressure that you feel to perform. It's the same pressure you feel when you step on a platform at a big meet, right? That execution needs to be on point. You need to have that perfect amount of arousal. You need to be able to be violent, but also controlled. That's the same pressure that I felt every day. And because I had that ability to pull on my experiences, I think it was more manageable for me to do what I needed to do. Mm-hmm. Yes, I did feel pressure from my wife. So it was and this isn't something that she put on me. This is, internalized, right? Because we had many conversations throughout the process of like, hey, like, do your thing. I'm here to support you. We're good. But in that, like, if she was removed from the equation, I don't think I would have acted any differently, because I was very clear on who I am. And who I am is someone who checks the boxes. Who I am is someone who does the work. Who I am is someone who is anti-fragile. And so if I am going to self-identify as having all of these characteristics, my actions need to reflect those.
Yeah.
So that for me, like the alignment between thoughts, feelings, and actions is very, very core to my daily life. And that's something that I've learned through a ton of therapy, a ton of self work. And I will be completely honest, from a physical perspective, that injury was the hardest thing I've ever done. Physically, I've never done anything harder. That was brutal. But emotionally, that was not the hardest thing I've ever done. I've been through some pretty challenging things, most self-induced. And so to be able again to draw on those experiences and say, you've been through worse. This is okay. This is an RPE 8. You know what a 10 is.
Yeah.
So you can live at an 8. And I just kind of did it like that. I will say the one thing I was not prepared for, anyone who's had a traumatic injury of some kind, the fatigue is unbearable. I was literally on the verge of falling asleep from the moment I opened my eyes in the morning to the moment I closed them at night. I napped every single day without fail because I just could not stay awake.
Right. The body's wanting to put all that energy to recovery, not being awake.
Oh my God, dude, I was not prepared for that at all.
Yeah.
And and in saying that, that actually challenged another part of my identity as someone who was a hard worker in business, because my productivity dropped like crazy.
Yeah.
And I actually had to hop on the phone. I talked about having a guide and how important that is. I hopped on the phone with one of my mentors and I was like, "Hey man, I feel like a piece of shit. I have all this time during the day, but I can't get anything done." And he's like, "I'm really glad you called me. And I'm going to say something that you weren't expecting. Chill the fuck out, buddy."
Yeah.
And it was exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. Just like being given permission to back off. That was exactly what I needed. So that was about 3 weeks into it. I started watching a little bit of TV. I started, reading books for pleasure, like fiction.
Yeah.
And and honestly, from then on, it was so much easier to manage because I didn't put that extra pressure on myself. But yeah, that was one thing that I was not prepared for and had to navigate. But otherwise,
Yeah.
just kind of focused inward.
Right. You got to a point where you could recognize your need and honor your need in the moment rather than like honor a like perception of who you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to operate.
Yeah, I like the idea. I like the idea of having a clear understanding of who you are, but I've also been more open lately to the idea that who you are is totally able to change over time.
Yeah.
Like especially as your life situation changes. So, for example, I mentioned off air that Liv and I want to start a family, and so I know that when I'm a father, I mentioned like I'm a husband, I'm a coach, I'm a mentor, I'm all these things. I know that father will come first. So that's going to reframe how I look at the other elements
Yeah.
of my identity.
Yep.
And I'm totally ready for that. Or I'm ready for that. You know what I mean? Like no one's ever ready for being a father, I don't think. But I'm aware of it. I know that who I am is going to change at the core. And I'm excited for that life transition because it's going to be one that I choose.
One of the things, though, that you said a couple of minutes ago that I think is important to something like this is all those things that you're naming are roles.
Yes.
But one of the things that was cool when you were talking about, I'm a person who checks the boxes. The boxes you were checking were more values based.
Yes.
And the way I think about it is, through your life, through life experiences with powerlifting, with bodybuilding, with just life situations and circumstances that were turbulent or hard, therapy, all those different things teach you to shape your values. And checking those boxes off, regardless of what the situation is, regardless of what the circumstance is, fundamentally more important than what the role is that you're serving.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I look at that as like you have those values defined. When fatherhood becomes the highest priority role, those checkboxes are still the same. Now they just apply to fatherhood. They just apply to another role.
Yep. I could not agree more. I think I mentioned it. It was either when you were on my podcast or when I was on your podcast the first time was, the question I ask a lot of my athletes of who are you, but you cannot use your family, your faith, your hobbies, or your job within the description. And so, when I said I am someone who does hard things, I am someone who checks the boxes, I'm some, all those
Yeah.
elements, those are independent of the roles that I play or the actions that I take
Yeah.
in my life. And I think it's important for us to realize that because as you mentioned, the roles that you play in your life are going to be prioritized based on the values that you have. And those values should not be moving targets to a large degree. And maybe they do. Maybe, things change and you become a different person, which is fine. But I know for a fact that I'm always going to be someone who pursues hard things. I'm always going to be someone who is anti-fragile. But the way in which those are manifested in my daily life will change for sure.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't powerlift anymore. I still lift weights, right? Like I'm still training 3 times a week with weights. Well, 5 times a week if you can include kettlebells.
No, they
But
don't count.
yeah, they don't count. Or 6 times a week. But it's still a manufactured hardship that I'm pursuing,
Yeah.
right? So I guess the vehicle changes, but you're still the same driver.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And I think what's so important for people to understand and connect with stuff like that is if you don't have that list of boxes to check off and you don't have those values defined, intentionally defined, you are going to wander and waver through life and essentially will ultimately likely be a victim of your circumstance and not be able to forge ahead with intentionality and purpose, create and claim what is yours and what you are capable of doing. And there'll be a ton of limitations in all the roles of your life as a result.
And I've been there, and that's a perfect description for 2 instances in my life. The first one being when I ultimately had what I would have considered to be a dream job as the head strength and conditioning coach at a major university. I didn't have any understanding of why I was so motivated to be there. I didn't have any understanding as to like why I was doing all the work, and it was purely focused on achievement. It's like, okay, I am worth something if I achieve.
Yeah.
Cool. Went through some therapy, made some changes, switched careers, and that ended up being the catalyst for starting Master Athletic Performance. Then it manifested itself again with my personal relationships. Like, why am I choosing the partner that I've chosen? Why am I, doing this activity instead of this activity? Why am I making these trade-offs when truly these trade-offs are more in line with my values? It's because I had no understanding of what my values were. And I ended up in a position where, I was one of the strongest people on the planet, but I was also like, I couldn't walk around the block with my dog. Like, what kind of life is that?
Yeah.
You enter into a personal relationship with somebody who doesn't value you simply because you perceive yourself as being worthless. That's not a situation that you want to be in. And so it was through these experiences that I really understood the value of my value. And then I was able to take more meaningful actions in line with those things. And I think the listeners will be looking at this or listening to this and being like, wow, these guys are like way out to lunch. This is way too heavy. It's not. It matters, and it absolutely is going to affect your ability to be successful on like if you're listening to this podcast purely as an athlete who wants to be as successful as possible on a platform, this shit matters.
100%. Like, even just a place that I always come back to with something with topics like this. If a person out there, if you're training with auto-regulation and RPE and any of those kinds of tools, and you don't have this value system, you are going to make errors left and right all the time. You're not going to be able to apply your training correctly, and thusly your stimulus is going to suck, your fatigue's going to be high, your recovery is going to be shit, and you will not be able to meaningfully pursue any PRs. You can only do that from a state of being grounded in the values and beliefs that define you. It has nothing to do with anything else. And that's like fundamentally, that's the core purpose and intention behind the intentional athlete, is to bring those qualities into our training and realize how important they are and what it does for the quality of your training and the quality of your life experience when those things get brought in.
And I mean, you can get pretty far. Like, I know some people who are just stupid strong, but everybody reaches a bottleneck. Everybody reaches a bottleneck, whether it's injury, whether it's burnout, whether it's time commitments. There is ultimately going to be a pivot point that you reach where the things you've been doing don't work anymore. And if you don't have an understanding of your core values and who you are as a person and why you're pursuing the things that you're pursuing, it's going to lead to bad decisions. And those bad decisions will force your hand, just like they did with me having to step away from the platform in 2021. Right? And
right.
That's the reality.
Let's go through a little thought experiment here with it. Mm-hmm. Let's say we have a power lifter who is just insanely gifted. Mm-hmm. Insanely gifted, insanely talented, just naturally super strong, and they compete at a really high level. Let's say they even win worlds, but they don't have any of this stuff integrated into who they are, what they believe, their process of training, or anything like that. How does that eventually manifest and show up in their life?
Oh man, in a multitude of ways. What? Okay, so one of the things that we see often in powerlifting is the flash in the pan lifter,
Mm-hmm.
right? They show up, they blow onto the scene, they have crazy results for a few years, and then they disappear. That is not the type of athlete who's going to resonate with our message.
True.
The person who's going to resonate with our message is the person who wants to be at the top for as long as possible. And it's going to manifest itself in their career. It's going to manifest itself into their ability to use their success to as a platform to impact others, in the fact that they won't be able to impact others. They're most likely going to make some decisions that are inherently selfish. They will most likely run into some issues with injuries. They'll most likely run into some issues with finances. They'll most likely run into issues with their enjoyment of what they're doing. And when you couple all of those things together, it's the perfect recipe for being successful for a couple years and then just ditching the sport. Like how many of the world records that we know are set by people who are in their, mid to late 30s?
Not many.
Most. Uh, I mean,
Well, I'm thinking about like IPF open world records currently tend to be almost younger and younger with the advent of raw lifting.
that's true. How many of them are repeated world record holders? Like they continue to break the world record.
Yeah, that's a fair point. There's a few here and there that stick out to mind, but I wonder as well, like where is the time frame long enough? Is the time scale long enough? I don't know, and the biggest reason I resist saying any names at a point like this is primarily because I also don't know these people, and I have
Right.
I have
Yeah,
no
yeah, totally.
business like stating names of those people
Totally.
that I don't know. Maybe they are on this level, and I don't know that yet. So maybe they're not, but I don't know them personally enough to like name those names in the context of this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And neither do I. I'm just making a broad stroke prediction that we would see. Like, the thing is, nobody would do the things that are required to win a world championship or set a world record if they didn't inherently love what they were doing. And so, whether that love comes from a place of deep understanding, or that love comes from an extrinsic motivator, or that love comes even from a deep insecurity, we see that a lot. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
powerlifting attracts misfits, right? So, if we're in a situation like that, how do we, as coaches and educators, instill upon people the need to slow down and be more intentional? Because if they're already the best of the best, you think about you think about like LeBron James will post videos of himself working out and he looks like a toolbox. He's the best player in the world, perhaps the best player all time, and that's the way he trains. If it got him to where he is, where's the incentive? I look at incentive structures a lot. I think incentive structures are a really important framework to understand as a coach because ultimately we are going to make the decision that has the most incentive for us. And incentives can be either short term or long term. Very rarely are they both.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're approaching someone who is having a ton of success in the short term, but we as experienced coaches know that they're making sacrifices for the long term, how do we get them to resonate with us and our message and say, hey, you're doing well now, but if you want to do well in 5 years, you need to listen to me now. That's a tough sell.
For sure, for sure. What do you try to do in that situation? Like how do you get somebody to see further down the road?
I try to find a common ground. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I was that flash in the pan lifter, right? I set my records, my personal records when I was 27, 28, 29. I didn't have a PR again until I was 34. So that's like 6 years between PRs. But I was motivated intrinsically through, I just loved powerlifting. I love the challenge. I still love powerlifting.
Yeah.
But I'm just not willing to make the trade-offs that I was willing to make at that point in my life. And maybe it's a conversation around, finding that common ground of, hey, what are your goals? Like, help them do the audit within themselves, because chances are they've never audited themselves. So, hey,
Yep.
what are your goals for this year? What are your goals for 5 years from now? Where do you think your life will be? What do you think your career will look like? What will your financial situation look like? What will your family situation look like? And try to get them to see that perhaps the trade-offs they're making in the short term aren't the ones that actually do align with their values. I see this a lot in business, if I'm being honest. I know we're talking about powerlifting, but I know a lot of the people listening are coaches. And when you ask a coach who maybe has a good solid roster, 30, 40 clients, they're making good money, where they want their business to be in 5 years, they might list a value as, oh, I value freedom, I value being able to travel, I value whatever, but in 5 years they want to open a gym. And I'm like, well, that goal doesn't align with your values. So do you really want to open a gym? And it's just like one example,
Yeah.
but it's a very clear example of value orientation with goals. And I don't think a lot of lifters do that personal audit and think about the long term when they're having success in the short term. So that's a big piece that I do, is like I do a personal audit and try to find a common ground, and then based on that discussion, well, then we just reverse engineer the plan from there.
Yeah.
And at that point, they're usually pretty bought in.
Yeah.
But there's always resistance.
For sure. I get that. But I really like the idea of like there being the idea of values and goals having alignment together,
Absolutely. Yeah.
because that's definitely like one of the missing ingredients. Like I tend to think about this most easily through my own experience, and like not necessarily being very competitive beyond the local level. I always kind of felt like I'm right on the bubble at the larger level of being competitive, but not really actually being competitive, like almost there, almost there, almost there, and never quite being able to get it until I turned 40 and became a master's, and now I'm more competitive.
More, at least slightly more competitive.
Slightly. But I look at that as like, how do I bring that to the table for people? Because, I'm 41 going on 42. I started training when I was 12 and really haven't ever left since the day that I started. Like you can't, even when I've been hurt and injured, I still go out to the gym. Last week when I was feeling like crap, I still went out to the gym and just did stuff to move my body, like try and keep me down and out. No, I'm not. It's because it's those values, and primarily like one of those biggest values is I value to seek and explore what can I do in this moment, what can I experience in this moment, regardless of whether it's a good training session, a PR training session or not. I want to explore it, and what does it have to offer me? Because I think when we approach it that way, there's such a larger door of possibility to learning, and anytime we learn, we elevate.
Yeah, that brings up a conversation around expectations. What is your expectation for this training session? At this point in my life, my expectation for the training session is that it will get done. Earlier on in my career, my expectation for every training session was that it had to be the stimulus that I wanted. And
But your body's not always going to be ready for the stimulus you want.
exactly. And so I think about, if I would have taken the same approach today or same approach from today, maybe 10 years ago, how much further along I could actually be now if I was just more patient, more accepting of circumstance, and I approached my training with less expectation and just took whatever was there. I don't think, I know for a fact I wouldn't have the injuries that I have. I know for a fact I wouldn't have fizzled out in terms of my progressions. And I can only speak to my own experiences and what I know to be true now. But dude, there were some training sessions I look back on and I'm like, how did I survive that?
Yeah, for sure. In high school, My football coach, who I love and respect very much, he's still a mentor of mine to this day, but he definitely got one of the things wrong from a, like, what is the training process, or what's the adaptation process? And I was under the impression that you tear a muscle and it heals into two, and you tear it again and it heals into three, and so it's this stacking layer effect, and that's how the muscle gets bigger. It tears
I
and
wish.
like overgrows itself. And so I, for years, chased training till I felt like I was tearing.
Sick.
Years. Training to failure every set, multiple sessions a day, multiple sessions a week, training to constant failure and feeling that tearing sensation and feeling like the soreness from feeling like there was a tearing or what I perceived to be some kind of tearing. I don't know how the fuck I got out of that time period without like an actual serious injury.
Well, you were young. You're put together. You're put together with rubber bands and hopes and dreams. You know?
Man, no kidding. If I tried to do that one time now, I don't know what would happen. It wouldn't be good though.
Yeah, I mean, I love training. I literally just love training.
Same.
As long as I'm working hard, I'm a happy camper. So whether that's, now, whether it's like a hard interval session on a bike, or whether that's a kettlebell workout in the garage, or whether it's a weight training session in a gym, as long as I'm training, I'm happy. But it's, like I said, the expectation is that it's just going to get done. And I'm totally okay. Like this morning was a suboptimal day from like a training setup. I had to go for a run and complete. So it was like 30-minute run, 30-minute of zone 2 after that run. So an hour of cardio. Then I had to eat my meal right away and then go to gym train. So I'm literally weight training at 90 minutes after I just did an hour of cardio. 30 minutes of which is running, which for me at 225 pounds is really hard. I got into the training session. I'm like, yeah, I'm really fatigued right now. Even my warm up was kind of tough. But then I got under the bar, started to do my warm ups for my split squats. I'm like, oh, I feel okay. Went up to the weight that I had programmed, and I was like, oh, this is pretty okay. I did my prescribed loads. Same thing on the dumbbell press, same thing on the row, same thing on the splits, on the single leg RDL. I'm like, oh, this is actually a pretty good session. Sweet. But if it wasn't, and I had to take weight off the bar, I'd have been totally okay with that.
Yep. And I think like that's one of the keys to think about for a listener out there is, if you have this crazy hard emotional response to having to take weight off the bar for a session,
Oh yeah.
there's something awry. There's something wrong with your perspective. There's something that needs to shift and change. And you will learn to actually get more out of your training by honoring that moment of taking a little bit off the weight or taking a little bit off the bar. Like that's just, listen to the wise old men talking right now.
And I mean, so I learned this to a large degree through training for bodybuilding, because in bodybuilding, the stimulus comes from failure, right? Proximity to failure. And so that's really independent of the load on the bar. So one of the things that I found to be tremendously beneficial when we're talking about the expectation of just getting the job done. If I have, let's say I'm doing 5 exercises. We'll talk about a leg day. So I have a leg curl, I have a leg extension, I have an adductor, and then I have probably 2 squat patterns. Cool. So I'm doing 2 sets of each. That's 10 total working sets. And I know that each one of those sets needs to be at a close proximity to failure. That close proximity to failure could mean heavy weight for 8 to 12 reps, no tempo. That could mean light weights, very high tempo, 8 to 12 reps, still the close proximity to failure. That could be a mix of heavy weights and light weights, tempo, not tempo. It could be a mix of some metabolic work in there where I'm pushing higher repetition sets. It doesn't matter as long as I reach proximity to failure. So on days when I was feeling really good and I felt like my central nervous system was okay to go heavy, I went really heavy. On days when I didn't, cool, I backed off the weight. I just made light weights really, really hard and I reached failure. And that in and of itself, that relinquishing of expectation that the weight on the bar or the weight on the machine had to go up, 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 or the reps had to go up, 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 and I left it with did I reach proximity to failure on these 10 working sets? If the answer is yes, it doesn't really matter how I get there as long as I get there. And then over the long term, those sessions stack up and you build the best physique you've ever had.
Yeah.
Seems simple enough to me. But people want to overcomplicate things and say, oh, if you're not reaching progressive overload in terms of weight or reps, your session's wasted. Get the fuck out of here.
Right. 100%.
You know?
100%.
And even if we're talking about the barbell, say you did the same volume as you did last week, but you improved your foot pressure, or you improved the sequencing of the lift, or the bar speed was faster, or you accumulated less perceived fatigue throughout the session. These are all progressive overload benefits, because we're talking about submaximal loads lifted for volume, right? Skill acquisition. Strength is a skill.
Right.
So if you're always seeking progressive overload in a skill-based movement, you're going to be missing out on a tremendous amount of adaptation that could have been had with ultimately less effort.
Right. I often paint the example, you mentioned LeBron James earlier, of, he's the all-time scoring champion, king of the NBA. Nobody scored more points than LeBron in the history of the NBA. If LeBron's sole focus and goal was from day one to score one more point each time he stepped on the court. In his first game, he set the standard real low. He had 0 points his first game. So his second game, he's got to hit 1 point, and then 2 points, and then 3 points. And that's the only thing he focuses on is one more point each game. That's it. His career is going to be so fucking short and miserable. We would never have heard that name, LeBron James, in our lives. He would have failed and quit before the end of the first season. Done.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that fucks us up so much in the sport of powerlifting is this just like, I get the goal of powerlifting is to see how much weight we can put on the bar and do one rep. But if that's what drives the decision-making process, you're going to have a horrible, horrible time.
Yeah. One of the things that I try to preach to my younger lifters, especially when it comes to attempt selection, is this isn't your last meet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you go 9 for 9 and you feel like you could have done more, great.
Cool.
You're going to have a lot more opportunities to do more.
Yep.
And so, using myself as an example, I knew that in December that was going to be my last meet. So if there was a meet to send it, of all the 30 plus meets that I've done in my career, that would have been the only one. But guess what? Every other meet, I tried to send it. And that's why I end up fizzling out.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So we're getting all over the place, and I want to make sure to be mindful of your time, but there's definitely one other little thing to pull at here.
Okay.
You obviously, like, after the injury, like, you knew the powerlifting was done and you weren't trying to go back to that, but you still have this core value of doing hard things, and so now you change and transition over to getting ready for the bodybuilding show.
Yep.
There's something we were talking about off the air that was particularly important to that I wanted to pull at was, like, the thing that you do have control of in pursuit of bodybuilding. It's, subjective on the stage. You can't necessarily control how you look to a certain degree or if somebody's going to look better than you or not. So there's this subjectivity. But there's the key point of the thing that you could control.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah. So the way bodybuilding is scored, you're scored on your muscularity, so how much muscle you carry. You're scored on your symmetry, so how that muscle is distributed over your body, and you're scored over your condition, so how lean you are and how much you are able to display your muscularity. And there's very little control over your genetics. Like, you can't change your genetics. I can't go back and choose different parents. So I can't change the width of my clavicles or the width of my waist or, where my muscle bellies insert or not. I can control how much muscle I accumulate to some degree, but many people accumulate muscle a lot slower than others. And I also can't control who shows up on that day. Funny enough, the guy who was competing in my class ended up getting his pro card 2 weeks later. So probably not going to beat that guy.
Yeah.
But the one thing I can control is my condition. And your condition is essentially how much body fat you carry. How much body fat you carry will be a direct relationship between the amount of suffering that you can endure. One of the main reasons why I chose a bodybuilding show as a comeback was because it was something that I knew I could train for safely after the injury. Everything could be controlled patterns. I could make sure that I was, moving in safe ways, that I had safety pins in all the machines. And so there was an element of confidence in my ability to train in that manner. And I also knew that one of the main priorities post surgery was to regain the bulk of muscle that I had lost in my legs. And bodybuilding was going to be the most expeditious way to do that. When I decided to do the show, I was already training like a bodybuilder. At that point, I was about 8 months post surgery. I had no knee pain, nothing. I was training hard, and my wife was preparing for her pro debut. She competes in the IFBB in the wellness division, and whenever she preps for a show, I decide to diet at the same time.
Yeah.
It's just easier for both of us to be dieting.
Yeah. Makes sense.
About 12 weeks out, I did a DEXA scan, and the DEXA scan showed that I was 230 pounds at 12% body fat, and I was like, all right, that's a pretty good spot. Let's put the hammer down. Let's see if we can get stage lean.
Yeah.
So I messaged one of our coaches and I said, hey, Jaden, I'm gonna do this thing. Full circle, I'm gonna come back to it. So conditioning. This is an element that I can control. I can control how little food I eat. I can control how much cardio I do. I can control how I, manage fatigue through the prep process to make sure that I'm not pushing the needle too far. But ultimately, I set the goal of, I'm not going to have the biggest legs on stage. I'm not going to have the prettiest shape. I'm not going to have the most muscle mass. But I can absolutely be the most conditioned dude on that stage. I can be the leanest dude in the show. And that was my only goal. So I checked the boxes every single day, making sure that I ate all my food, did all my cardio, managed my stress, and I got the feedback that I was, in fact, the leanest person in the show. So I controlled what I could control.
Yeah.
And to me, that was a victory. The other
Big time.
victory was the fact that, 13 months post quad tendon rupture, I show up and, I have the best physique that I've ever had. My quads look better than they did in my first show. No one believed that I had actually had quad tears until they saw the scars. So that was, the amount of pride that I felt in that moment from just my own intrinsic feelings of pride. I did something really cool. And I gave myself the opportunity to feel that. And that was really, really special. And then I got to share it with my wife. It's also pretty special.
Your ability to feel that, how much of that is in direct correlation, though, as well to to endure the hard work and the hard effort?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I am somebody who struggles to feel pride. I'm someone who, in my life, can count on two fingers the times that I've felt pride. The first was at my wedding to my wife. I was so proud of the relationship that we built. And then the second was walking off that stage. And the reason I felt pride in both of those moments, because I knew they were a direct reflection of my own personal growth. And I knew that I did that work. I set that goal. I closed that chapter, and I did so in an emphatic fashion. It wouldn't have mattered if I won the show or not. It wouldn't have mattered where I placed. It's nice to win your division, right? But ultimately, I was proud of the process that I went through, and the fact that I was able to finish that process and do what I set out to do. That amount of pride is not something that you can put on a trophy.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, and that's huge. Like, that's definitely something to really drive home, is like those things that really matter, that really drive the car, that really create the sense of fulfillment, is not going to be any of those things that you can put on the trophy or retain in any kind of a trophy. And you don't have to win.
No.
It's not even about winning. Is winning nice? Do you want to win? Yeah, sure. Of course. Still, like, we're not saying it's not an excuse to be complacent and not pursue your highest level possible. Yeah. However, the biggest and most important thing is that the greatest amount of satisfaction and joy and fulfillment from competition, from competing, is not winning. It's what you just discovered. It's what you just experienced in that moment of, like, having this thing to have worked towards and worked through, and being able to be proud of your inputs and what that meant and how that impacts things.
Absolutely.
You know, and like I felt the same way last year when I got off the podium at Worlds. It was like, wow, like did it. It wasn't ever about, oh, I beat that guy. It was, did this thing, like I went through all these things all these years and put on all this effort, you know, like, which was also why I was able to like get off the stage and go, next, forward ahead we go. It wasn't like, oh, I got to get back here and beat this guy again. It's, I just felt and tasted what it's like, and I want more, but it has nothing to do with the win. Like competition to me, really all that does is like, one, it gives you structure, it gives you a place to structuralize things and have an aiming point. And two, it's fun to go do shit with like-minded people that have put in the same effort.
Yeah. The visual that I like is like reaching the top of a mountain is only cool because at the top of a mountain you can see the other mountains that are that you're able to climb.
Yeah.
And so even though like, could I continue to compete in bodybuilding? Absolutely. Could I continue to improve my physique? Absolutely. My goals have changed. My goal now is to be as fit and capable as I possibly can so that I can play on the ground with my kids when we have a family. And you know, I've attached that to a competitive outlet. I'm going to be competing in tactical games, but ultimately, like whether I compete in tactical games or not, I'm still going to train the way I train.
Yeah.
And the training looks completely different than it used to, but it's so much fun. And I'm a beginner again, and I'm climbing a different mountain.
Yeah, man. The thing I've always enjoyed as well about that analogy of climbing a mountain is when anybody that's climbed a hard mountain, when you get to the top, you realize like the climax of climbing a mountain is much different than I think a lot of people think it will be. At least for me, when I would hike backcountry when I was still living in Alaska and I'd get to the top, it was less of like, yeah, I did that, and more a matter of like a sense of peace and calm at the sound of silence that you get at the top of a mountain. And like experiencing that is like, that's the serenity. The gift is the serenity. And like all the noise shuts off and stops, and it's just serenity and bliss.
Yeah, I like that.
Awesome, Paul. Well, I definitely really appreciate your time today. Lots of really awesome stuff. I super appreciate your perspective and your friendship. Is there anything else that you would like to leave anybody with based on our conversation today?
Maybe just the additional, you know, impetus to dive into yourself a little bit more and get to understand your core beliefs. I think aligning your thoughts, feelings, and actions is probably the most important thing that you can do on a daily basis.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the pressures that we feel in life are directly related to a misalignment in those three things. You might feel something and not understand why.
Yeah.
You might take actions and not understand why. You might be putting yourself in circumstances that you may not understand how you got there. And I think creating that alignment on a daily basis, whether it's through journaling, through meditation, through any sort of quote unquote self-care practice, is incredibly valuable. And dude, right back at you. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate the time and the platform to share a little bit of my experience. And I do hope that the listeners got a little bit from it.
Yeah, me too. I think to add to that real quick too, like anytime I think a person feels like shame or guilt is usually the sign that there is something behind in those things that you just listed. And the fastest way to dissolve and resolve those feelings of shame and guilt within your life are to ensure that you have the awareness to those things and then create the alignment. Boom. All of it just goes away. And
absolutely,
man, life is so much fucking fun when you don't have to carry that kind of stuff around with you.
Dude, life is amazing.
100%.
So cool.
Love it. All right, Paul, I appreciate your time. I'm going to let you go. I appreciate you.
Pleasure.
Have a good day.
Appreciate you. You too, buddy. Bye.